Hello, hello, this is Amanda Faye Illustration. I am back again with another speed paint video. This time I'm working on FREDRIX watercolor canvas, and it was definitely a different experience. There are some pros and cons to using the canvas, which I'll explain a little bit later, but first I just wanted to talk about this piece. This is Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald singing "Dream a Little Dream of Me." I just love this concept. It was something that I created years ago and just had it in a sketchbook. I've just been trying to find a way to execute it so it does the concept justice. I used my original sketch as a guide for the concept, but I completely started over with the actual drawing. So my first step was to get a really clean drawing on a separate piece of paper, and then I used transfer paper to put it onto the canvas. Like most of my paintings, I covered the main drawing with masking fluid and then started with the background. And this is when I first discovered that working with watercolor on canvas, you have to paint in a different way. So with the canvas, the paint sits on top of it and doesn't actually absorb into the canvas like it would on paper. I figured out that I needed to take a different approach to get my darks in there. So what I ended up doing was dropping in a lot of color in the areas where the shadows are and not blending it out like I normally would. I was working in two different styles with this painting because the idea behind this is that Louis Armstrong is dreaming of Ella Fitzgerald, and so in his head they're singing "Dream a Little Dream of Me" together. So I wanted Louis to be a more realistic portrait, while Ella Fitzgerald and of course the instruments, everything that was inside of Louis's head was his imagination, so it could be more creative. As I mentioned before, I found that working on this canvas had a lot of pros and cons. I'll start with the things that I didn't like about working on this so that I can end with a positive note. So I didn't like how it seemed like the paint was not permanent. My personal style is a lot of different layers, and with this I could only do 1 or 2 layers. Anything beyond that, it just wiped away what I had already laid down. Because I couldn't layer color like I would on paper, I relied more on refining certain areas, so I focused on the fine details a lot sooner than I normally would have. I also found that the pencil showed through more so than it does on paper. I think on paper, when the water and pencil mix together, it absorbs into the paper just as the paint does, whereas with the canvas, it just stays on top of it. Luckily with this piece I used ink and acrylic, so the final piece doesn't have pencil showing through, but I think if I just used plain watercolor, I wouldn't have been able to have the full sketch on the canvas before I started painting. Some of the things I did like about working on the canvas was that since it required less layers, the final piece was done faster. I did this probably in about 7 hours, and I think if I would have done it on paper, it would have been at least 1 or 2 more. The really great thing about having a finished piece on canvas is that it doesn't have to go behind glass. Typically with watercolor, since it's just a thin piece of paper, in order to display it, you have to frame it. So the value automatically increases when it's on canvas. You also don't have to worry about damage that glass may cause if the glass were to break. Having it on canvas doesn't mean that it doesn't need protection. In order to protect this painting, I varnished it, which is a series of a fixative spray and then a gloss varnish with protective qualities. Lastly, I really loved that I was able to easily turn the orientation of the painting as I was working on it. Typically when I'm working with watercolor on paper, I have to tape it down. So if I want to get a different angle, I have to completely change my setup, move my chair, move my palette, my water, everything to a different spot so I can get the right angle. With this, I was just able to turn the actual canvas to adjust to where I was already sitting. You'll see me doing this a lot throughout the painting, especially when I was doing the line work. The more you do line work, you'll realize that you only have one, maybe two ways of holding your pencil or pen, whatever you're using. For me, it's about being able to see the end point when I'm doing line work. If I'm drawing a line and suddenly my hand covers the object that I'm lining, then I run the risk of making the wrong mark. So being able to turn the paper so that I never obstruct where the end line is made working on the canvas a great experience. I decided to add in the splatter paint at the very last second, and I'm so glad I did. It just brought everything together and made it so lively. So it really feels like there's movement and excitement in this piece. I really hope that you enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun for me to do. And if you have any questions, please comment below and be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much. Bye.